Greetings, everybody, and welcome to part 5 of my sermon series. This is an extra one. This is a bonus one, and mainly because I want to talk about what happened after the elections and to give you my interpretation of what I believe is going to happen. And I'm recording this on October the 9th. I've been working on this since the early afternoon hours. So many evangelical Christians were absolutely surprised and if not shocked when they realized that Biden was declared the winner of the 2020 presidential election. Many evangelicals and Pentecostals and conservatives were expecting that Trump was going to win the election, hands down. Many prophets were saying the same thing. So the question is, did Pastor Dana Coverstone, did he get it wrong? He wasn't the only one who was saying this. There were a number of Christian leaders and prophets who were saying the exact same thing, that Trump was going to win. So did all of them get it wrong? So the Bible tells us what is a test of a true prophet. In fact, when Jeremiah was preaching and teaching, he was known as a prophet of doom and gloom. All the other prophets, all the other false prophets in ancient Israel were talking about peace and prosperity. Everything's going to be fine. Nothing is going to happen to us. There's not going to be an invasion. And Jeremiah was the only one who was preaching doom and gloom and God's judgment upon the land of Israel. So he challenged these so-called prophets as, look, if what you're saying is going to come true, then you are a true prophet. So this is what he said to them. Jeremiah chapter 28, verse 9. So a prophet who predicts peace, like all of them were doing, must show that he is right. Only when his predictions come true can we know that he's really from the Lord. So if someone makes a prediction and they come true, then most likely we can say they come from God. If they don't come true, then we can most likely say, you know what, they don't come from God. Now sometimes we get a wrong interpretation of what we see, what we dream, but I think this is the standard that we should go by. So let's begin first by revisiting the dream that from August 25th, the one he posted on August 25th, 15 minutes long. This was the one when he talked about what was going to happen for the month of November in great detail. The dream began where he saw the calendar month of November, and it was bent, torn, and dirty. I didn't mention this initially. I don't think I did my first sermon about this. But the fact that it was dirty leads me to believe that the elections are going to be dirty, or were going to be dirty. Maybe. But let's continue. He saw this headline. Now, everything he saw in this dream, I don't think necessarily everything is in chronological order, but one of the things he did see, and this is probably one of the most important one of them all, is that he saw headlines where it was said that Trump's victory challenged everywhere. Trump victory challenged everywhere. So many, including myself, believe that this meant that Trump was going to outright win the election after November the 3rd. And of course, I did say back then that we were not going to know exactly who was going to win the election November 3rd because of the mail-in ballots. So it would take a few days, maybe a few weeks before everything was counted. But that he was going to be leading on November the 3rd. Well, we all know what happened. At 2 o'clock in the morning, on Wednesday morning, he went ahead and declared victory. Mainly because he was ahead in Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So since he was leading in these states, and some of them were by huge margins, he declared himself to be the winner, the victor of the presidential election. Of course, once he declared himself to be the victor, turns out this victory was challenged by the media. Sure enough, the mainstream media did not like that he had done that. And even the news networks also challenged his claim of victory on that morning hours. So it may well be that, in one sense, that part of prophecy was true. We misunderstood it, but indeed he did declare himself to be the victor, and that was challenged immediately by the mainstream media and the news network. So, and then something else very important about November 2020, the calendar, what he saw, and it was about November the 3rd, what he saw. Even though I mentioned it, I didn't realize that there might be something significant and important about that. But he saw that the finger was circling on November the 3rd, and it was going clockwise. And then after it went clockwise, and this is significant, it did the opposite thing. It went counterclockwise. And again, at that time, it was not very clear that this was actually something that could potentially be very significant on what it means. And we're going to discover that a little bit later on. After that, he saw cities on fire, including Washington, D.C. He saw violent protests. People were absolutely angry and outraged by what had happened. And he also saw angry mobs by what had happened. And of course, we're assuming, when he shared this, we're assuming because Trump had won the election. But could it signify, this reversal, could it signify that some of the election results from certain states are going to be reversed? And that's what's going to lead ultimately to the chaos and the rioting and the violent protests and the angry mobs. Could it be? Is this far-fetched that some of the states which have already been declared for Biden could be reversed? Could be reversed. Is it far-fetched? I don't think it is. The truth of the matter is, I recorded this, I got these numbers around 1 o'clock or so on Monday, October the 9th. And you can see here that Trump is just 0.5% away from catching up Joe Biden. He's only 17,131 votes away from catching up. And at the rate he's going, potentially it's not inconceivable that he's going to ultimately overtake Biden. That's one state. And the other state, which I think may ultimately be reversed, is Pennsylvania. You can see here, he's only 0.7% away from catching up, once again, Joe Biden. 45,565 votes away. But here's what's significant about Pennsylvania, even though Biden supposedly had already taken it by the media, is that the Supreme Court on Friday, Joe Biden was declared winner on Saturday, but on Friday night, the Supreme Court stepped in and told Pennsylvania that they had to separate all the mail-in ballots that arrived after 8 p.m. on Tuesday night. After 8 p.m. All those ballots had to be separated. And AP press, they knew it. They knew. Why is that so significant? Well, because the Pennsylvania local Congress passed this law in 2019, Act 77, October 31st, 2019. And there's something very significant about the law that local state government passed. And here's a quote. No absentee ballot under this subsection shall be counted which is received in the office of the County Board of Elections later than 8 p.m. on the day of the primary or election. So the local government of Pennsylvania had already made it officially a law that no ballots will be counted after 8 o'clock Tuesday of the election day. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania stepped in and said, you know what, even though this is law, we're going to disregard this law and we're going to create a new law and say, you know what, you are allowed to count all those ballots after 8 o'clock, in fact, up to 3 days after the election, even if they're not postmarked. Absolutely ridiculous. They're not allowed to do that. The Constitution clearly says that it's the state government that decides the law, and not the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. So if that happens, if Pennsylvania, those votes do not get counted because the Supreme Court says they should not be counted, and if Arizona then is flipped back to Trump, it could well mean that Biden would drop from 290 to 259. And if he drops to 259, he can no longer be considered president-elect. I really believe that AP, which called the election for Biden, made a big, huge mistake. In fact, they were the one that called Arizona for Biden right off the bat on Fox News, right off the bat on the election night. And of course, Trump team was very upset that AP called, and they had this one guy on there on Fox saying, you know what, we got it right. We are right. Well, it turns out they could well be wrong about calling Arizona for Biden. So again, I think they made a mistake, and I think that, and I'm being cynical, I think that they did this to give Biden the offense in terms of the election, put Trump on the defense, and I think it's worked. I think it's worked. So if this is to happen, okay, and this is a big if, and I think Arizona being called back to being flipped back for Trump can happen as early as Tuesday, tomorrow, maybe as late as Wednesday. If this was to happen, I can see how people will begin to riot out of anger and frustration because, they had it. They had the election. They had already won. And now suddenly it's been taken away from them. And I think mainly because AP called it way too early. Besides that, we also have Dana Coverstone Data Dream, which I think he put out, I think it was around October 20th. Yeah, that's the day he had the dream. And the dream is about 60 minutes long. Now, I saw it the night that he posted it, and I thought to myself, this is kind of confusing. I don't know what it means, so I did not want to take a stab at the interpretation of the dream. But now, after everything has happened, I think it's becoming clear what this dream ultimately means. So it begins with he sees an atlas map of the United States. Okay, along with the map of the United States, he sees a bunch of network circuits that are connected to each other and connected to the different states. And some of these circuits were flashing, and data, information was traveling in these circuits. Okay, and that's very significant. You also saw that some people were working, they were wearing white coats, they were working on certain data. They wanted to make sure that the circuits were not getting too hot. In fact, some of them were getting too hot, and they wanted to make sure that these circuits did not burn out. So they were very determined to make sure that everything was under their control, although sometimes they were not very successful. Then he saw that data began to travel from the West Coast, and it was traveling eastward. Okay, up to the line of the Mississippi. Along the way, you heard warning sirens. Some of these circuits were being overloaded and couldn't handle the traffic data that was going through those circuits. So therefore, then the data was then being rerouted to other cities. And he specifically heard, go around Reno and get to Vegas. Go around Reno and get to Vegas. Later on, we're going to see how significant this little piece of detail is for our interpretation of the dream. He also saw smoke clouds in the big cities. Now, these smoke clouds, ultimately what they were doing, they were actually giving out data. They contained data, information. So it was being passed on from these particular cities. And then he also saw a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And as soon as it hit 0, the focus then shifted to the East Coast. All this data began to travel to the East Coast. Then quite suddenly, the focus was on the city of Philadelphia. The data line, all that data was heading straight to Philadelphia. In fact, he saw a red network line going into Philadelphia. And then it went underneath the Liberty Bell. And after he saw that the pressure began to build. All this data was there and began to build pressure, and suddenly it exploded. The Liberty Bell went up in the air, and then it split in half, and then it fell to the ground. So now let me give you my interpretation, what I think this data interpretation, the data dream means. Okay, this is just actually half of the dream, but let me start off with this half. Okay, this is strictly my interpretation. And so this is what I think it means. I think the data represents the election results. Okay, the workers represent the poll workers trying to tabulate the results and even trying to control the election itself. The hot circus, I think, represents that Trump leading in a number of these states, and they're trying to control the fact that he's leading, trying to control that it does not overtake and win the election. So workers were trying to prevent a Trump victory, and they were doing all kinds of things to prevent the Trump victory, including, unfortunately, fraud, which I think eventually will be revealed. The fact that there was a red network line straight into Philadelphia, I think, is symbolic of the fact that Trump was leading Philadelphia late that evening. The red, because the Republican Party is red. Eventually, it turned blue, right? When all the mail-in ballots were counted in Philadelphia, it turned blue. But initially, it was red. That's the reason why I think that was the color of the red network line. Now, Philadelphia turns out, unsurprisingly, and I told my family, I bet you anything in the world that Philadelphia is going to give Biden the win for the election, and they're going to declare him to be president-elect because of Philadelphia. Sure enough, Philadelphia was the last remaining, Pennsylvania was the last remaining state that gave the victory to Biden. And indeed, CNN, Fox News even said that Nevada and Pennsylvania were the last two states that went blue and gave Biden the victory. Nevada and Pennsylvania. Is it an accident that among the three cities that Dana Coverstone saw in that data dream, Reno, Nevada, and Philadelphia, is it an accident that they all belong to these last two states that gave Biden the victory? Is that an accident? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Those three cities were mentioned, and those were the last two states that gave Biden the victory on that Saturday. Now, the destruction of the Liberty Bell, I think, ultimately represents the corruption and the destruction of our democracy due to the fraud and the cheating and the corruption within our government. The good news, however, the dream does not end there, because the data continue to travel all the way to Washington, D.C. We're going to see why that is significant. He then saw some people who were dressed in business attire. I think that represents lawyers fighting for all these cases throughout our nation for the election results. He also saw judges. And essentially, these lawyers and these judges were trying to stop the data from arriving at Washington, D.C. They did not want this to lead all the way to the Supreme Court. All these different cases that are right now pending. But in the end, they were not successful. And it did end up all the way in Washington, D.C. And it turns out, as we have already seen, the Supreme Court has already stepped in. And they will make a decision regarding those mail-in ballots which was received after 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. And the ones also received Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. They're gonna say something about it. And then eventually the data then finally reached the Capitol building, and when it got there, it got overloaded. The Capitol building then blew up, split into two. That explosion created a smoke cloud. And when all that smoke settled, there was this very important word, discovery. Discovery. I think that is a reference to the fact, as a result of the cases landing up in the Supreme Court, that they're going to discover that indeed, there was fraud and corruption in our election. Fraud and corruption. This is what they're going to discover in the end, I believe. And so once the word discovery came out, these politicians began to run away, not from the explosion, not from the Capitol building, but from the word discovery, as if they did not want to be associated with the corruption and the fraud that had taken place in our recent election. And then after that, he saw a brand new scene altogether. And he saw a closed casket. And a bunch of politicians were there. And people were sad. He also saw a sign on top of that casket. And the sign said this is the Democratic candidate for the office of president. Joe Biden was in that casket. It was a closed casket, and they did not want to open it at all. And there was also a date right above the casket. And that date is December 17. Now, Pastor Dana Coverstone he made it very clear that he did not necessarily believe that meant the death of Joe Biden. And this could be either literally, we can take this literally, that might signify the death of Joe Biden, or we can take it symbolically, whereby this could mark the end of his political career. Never to rise again. That will be the end for Joe Biden in terms of his aspirations for a politician. Will come to a crashing end. So it can go either way. It can be symbolic or literal. We'll soon find out on December 17. However, I do believe that this will drag out until December. I think, again, some of the states may flip in November, leading to some trouble. But until all the votes are counted and all these cases are decided by Supreme Court, it's going to drag up until December next month. And if it does drag out and things don't turn out the way that many wanted to turn out, it could be chaos. There could be chaos in our cities. And I also believe that Justice Amy Coney Barrett, she's going to play a very crucial role in how the Supreme Court will decide all these cases regarding our election. In fact, going back to the dream he posted on August 13, the one where he was emphasizing what's going to happen for the month of October. And he saw a finger that was on the line the second and third week of October. Back then, when I first talked about this dream, I talked about that this is actually a reference to Justice Amy, that the Democrats would get very upset, very angry. The fact that she had been nominated by President Trump. And of course, this was all the media covered during those 2 weeks in October, all about her election to the Supreme Court. And in fact, he also saw in that same dream, which I did not mention, but in that same dream, he saw a rock that came out of the sky and landed on this large pond, and it caused ripple effects, and then soon it caused a huge wave. I think, again, this is my interpretation, that Amy is that rock, which ultimately is going to cause huge waves upon our nation. And she, again, is going to play a very deciding role in determining how this election is going to be handled in the end. So again, if this interpretation is accurate, he did say that in December he saw the stock market crash. And again, I think because of the chaos that this may ultimately bring about in our nation, and then people being very angry, very upset, it can cause a stock market crash during the month of December. It's not that far-fetched to believe this. So, come December 17, we're going to determine how true Dana Coverstone dreams are. We'll find out if these things happen. Then indeed we can say, you know what, this is a man who definitely was hearing from God. If none of this happens and Joe Biden remains the president-elect on December 17 or December 18, then we can honestly say, you know what, Dana Coverstone got it wrong. I don't think he's deliberately lying, but he got it wrong. He was not hearing from God. You know, so it can go either way. It can go either way. We'll soon find out. Time will soon tell whether indeed Pastor Coverstone is indeed hearing from the Almighty God or whether he is not hearing from God. Soon, time will tell. We're about to enter into that storm. Soon, time will tell. But I want to end it with this, with Philippians chapter 3, verses 13b through 14, from the Apostle St. Paul. I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. In other words, our faith does not rest on Joe Biden. Our faith does not rest on Donald Trump. Our faith lies on Jesus Christ. So therefore, we need, as believers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. No matter what the outcome may be, keep our eyes on the prize and focus on making sure that we finish this race as Christian. So just keep your eyes on Jesus, no matter what the outcome may be. And it turns out, depending on what happens, December 17 or other dreams he may share, there might be more coming. I might do another part. So we'll soon see. But for the time being, I really wanted to hurry up and share with you all my interpretation of what I think the data dream means, and also give a deep analysis about the dream from November. So God bless you all. If you were blessed and you know people who are aware of Dana Coverstone's dreams, you may want to share this with them. God bless you all. Bye.